Here's what's coming up on episode 98 of the Big Seance Podcast. Andrea Perron.
I was the face of The Conjuring, and Warner Brothers flew me everywhere. I mean, I was all over the place. Ed and Lorraine Warren, none of us believed that they in any way tried to maliciously do anything to hurt us or exploit us or use us in any conceivable way. I think that happened inadvertently. It did happen. And she put her hand down on the corner of the black stove in the kitchen, and she covered her eyes and she said, "There's a malignant force in this house. There's a malicious presence. Her name is Bathsheba." But she was levitated into the air, and in a split second, she was thrown from the middle of our dining room 20 feet away into the middle of our parlor. And when she hit the floor in the chair she was sitting in, everyone that was present in that house heard her skull hit the floor, and we all thought she was dead. They had a very strange, almost like little brother, little sister. They were basically the same age. She figured he was about 5 or 6 when he died. And so when she met him, they were the same age. And then he was stuck and she grew up. She went on national news programs and called my mother a liar. You know, I mean, she could not be more disingenuous. She's angry. She's angry because James Wan reneged on a deal for them to film The Conjuring at the farm. And I am very sorry that she was inundated with prowlers and inundated with creepy crawling kids. And I'm very sorry that somebody took a crowbar to Bathsheba Sherman's gravestone and desecrated her gravesite. My mother called me, and I was, in my finals, in my senior year, and called me and told me that the farm was sold. I thought I would die.
Welcome to the Big Seance Podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of bigseance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance. In the summer of 2013, like most of you, I began hearing about an exciting upcoming film called The Conjuring, a movie that I think is safe to say is loosely based on the decade of haunting experiences of the real-life Perron family, Carolyn, Roger, and their 5 daughters in the 1970s. I was fortunate enough to be invited to a pre-screening of the movie before it hit theaters all over the country. I wrote a review of that movie at bigseance.com, and from that moment on, for about a year, I was really addicted to the movie and discovering the true story. Our guest, Andrea Perron, who is the eldest Perron daughter, has written a massive and beautiful trilogy. Probably many of you have read it. 3 books that chronicle that decade of paranormal activity that their family experienced. Her beautiful style of writing leaves no detail behind, and she puts you in that farmhouse with the family, with the characters that you read about. Until Andrea's books, and then followed by the 2013 Conjuring film, the story wasn't widely known to the world. I read the whole trilogy over a period of about a year, I think, and blogged probably a total of 10 times about the books and the events as I processed and thought about it all. And in a way, it was kind of like my own little journal. And this was all shortly before I launched the podcast, which is about 3 years old now. So the paranerds who have been with me from day one will remember all of this and be very knowledgeable about the things that Andrea will be talking about with us today. And I'm so excited to finally have the lovely Andrea Perron here on the Big Seance Podcast today. Welcome to my parlor, Andrea.
Oh, welcome to my netherworld, Patrick.
already decided that we are like, I just said earlier, I think we're cousins from another life.
Yeah.
And so I'm so pumped to have you on the show because we've talked for, at this point, probably like 2 hours now. So I'm excited to actually interview you.
Oh, that's wonderful. I just want you to know right from the start that no question is out of bounds. I will answer anything. You know me well enough now already to know that I'm going to give you a straightforward answer, even if it's something someone doesn't want to hear. And it is the brutality and yet the soft, round, fuzzy edges of my honesty that is forefront in my persona. It's who I am. It's what I am. I put everything on the line to tell this story, not knowing how the world would react, not knowing. I had to Google, once I finally learned how to use a computer to write the manuscript, I always hand wrote and used a typewriter for everything that I've ever written. So I had to, develop a whole new skill set. And once I had about 200 pages, it was time to turn it into a manuscript. And when I got about 2/3 of the way through the trilogy, which was actually one whole book that was literally too big to print, so my publisher said, let's just break it into 3. And so, I had to Google the words paranormal and supernatural to see if there was anybody out in the world that was interested in what I was devoting my life to. And wasn't I surprised when I found out that there are millions of people around the planet that are fascinated and curious and have had multiple experiences themselves, and in that process want to know more and want to learn more. And there are many, many paranormal groups around the country now that introduce new members to my trilogy as a primer and tell them that they have to read it before they can join the group so that they'll be prepared. And that to me is a great honor. That's like the paranormal Pulitzer as far as I'm concerned. It means a lot to me because what it says is that, people do understand and accept the story. I'm working on screenplays right now for each one of the books. And in the next year or two, the films will start to be released one at a time and pretty close back to back. I'd like to have them all released within 1 year.
How excited am I for that?
It is going to tell the real true story. But getting back to where I was actually going with this diatribe, you were one of the first people who really picked up and made a correlation and an integration between the Conjuring and the real true story behind the books, which is the trilogy House of Darkness, House of Light. I opened a vein. Everybody in my family did in order to tell this story. And I'm so, so glad that it got done before I lost my baby sister, April, 3 months ago. It has shattered our family. It's just been an incredible, painful experience to lose her so young. It still doesn't seem real. I'll never recover from it. But it also opened my heart in a way that I cannot even describe. There are no words that are adequate in this language or any other to express the sentiments that I feel about it and the privilege to write the screenplay and to write her character in, no matter how many tears flow as I do it, to bring her to life on the screen in an authentic way. And I have no resentment toward The Conjuring at all. You did a beautiful review of The Conjuring right when it came, just before it came out. And I found it online. It came up in my Google alerts. And I was like, oh, what's this? And I read it, and it was incredibly well written. You have a mastery of the language. You are really a true intellectual powerhouse, and the way that you handled the material, I thought was brilliantly done. And I was so glad. And I remember at the time saying, I hope all of them are this good. I hope. I really wanted the movie to succeed, because the truth of the matter is the real true story behind The Conjuring would be languishing in obscurity had it not been for that film.
Right.
And even though the portrayal is not accurate, in every detail. And, there are huge gaping wounds in terms of, the actual history of the house, which is all delineated in the book to the best of our ability, working with incomplete documents, of course, and memory. But it is a true memoir. You know that because it drags you as the reader. Anybody that's invested in it, let me say, is dragged into the story with us and lives on the farm with us for the length of time that we are there. And it just assimilates into an open mind in a way that not very much literature does. And I don't take all the credit for that. I had an enormous amount of help in terms of writing the trilogy, not only the contributions of every member of my family in terms of their recollections of their own stories, but I had a lot of spiritual guidance in writing it too, because the spirits wanted their story told. And it was my privilege and my pleasure to do that and to, publish each member of my family in the collective memoirs in volume 3, and to, put down whole huge passages that were literally verbatim in quotation marks from my sisters and my mother and my father, and really make it a collective memoir that encompassed all 7 of us and covered that 10 years plus. I started with, as you well know, introducing the reader to my family as a perfectly normal, middle-class, suburban family. And then you come along for the ride and feel what happens as we become a paranormal family. It's quite a transition going from 3D, 5-sensory living to seeing multidimensionally, extra-dimensionally. It is a true journey, and it's predominantly a spiritual journey. The books were not written to be horror stories. It wasn't a horror story. It was much more so a love story. Now I'm going to take a breath, and it's your turn to talk.
I'm glad to let you talk. I think most people know that the 2013 movie is based on Ed and Lorraine Warren's case files. But is it true that the first 2 books of your trilogy that came out first inspired producers of the film to even take a look at the story in the first place?
No, they already had their finger on the pulse of the Ed and Lorraine stories.
Before you even released your trilogy?
Yes.
Okay.
They did. In fact, I believe, what year was it? 2007 or 2008 is when I signed my initial agreement that a film could be made using the names and likenesses of my family.
Oh, wow.
And then, of course, it took 3 years before they even picked up a camera. They sent the script back 7 times because the brass at Warner Brothers said, you've got to tone this down. We don't need people having heart attacks in the theater. We don't need them running out of the theater. You can't really use the real story. You can take, little tidbits here and there, which they did. They cherry-picked my books, the first 2. And the screenwriters told me when I met them in person, when we went to the set, that my name had been on their lips every single day for 6 months as they read through the books and, plucked this and plucked that. And, the whole hide and seek thing, was something that they took and then augmented into hide and clap and, lots of different things. The Annabelle doll had absolutely less than zero to do with our story. None of us ever saw it. Mm-hmm. It was not what it was portrayed in the film. It's just a Raggedy Ann doll, but the company that owns the rights to Raggedy Ann went and caught them up. So anyway, the Ed and Lorraine's case files, which became this ongoing series of movies, was on the radar before they even knew that I existed, that I would be cooperative, or that I was writing a book. I ended up being a consultant on the film to a limited extent. I mean, they didn't even bother to list any of us in the credits. And, we did put ourselves out there for them, but apparently they forgot to mention us in the credits, and I don't care. That's fine. I mean, the freaking movie's about us, so I guess people just assume we had something to do with it. And they interviewed all of us, and then they just pulled it together between the case files that Lorraine had on her original notes and Ed's original notes, and plucked a little of this and a little of that out of my books. But there's not a single scene, as you well know, there's not a single scene in The Conjuring that's directly from my books, not one.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that was because I had my books tied up contractually, and part of it was because they were afraid to tell the truth, because in this rare instance, the truth is stranger than fiction. And The Conjuring is predominantly fictional. And the one point that I would have to make is that Ed and Lorraine Warren, none of us believe that they in any way tried to maliciously do anything to hurt us or exploit us or use us in any conceivable way. I think that happened inadvertently. It did happen, and I really do believe that it was inadvertent on their part, and they were just so spellbound and enchanted and blown away by what they saw in our house and what they experienced there, that they felt compelled to talk about it, and sometimes they talked too much about it.
Yeah, in your book, it seems like the family ends the relationship with the Warrens on bad terms. That's what I was gonna ask you, is if that really was the case.
Yes, that really was the case. My father threw them out of the house the night of the séance, and he blamed them for, well, not them particularly, yes, them to an extent, but predominantly blamed the medium that they brought with them, who conducted a séance against his will in the house and incorporated my mother into it. And my mother almost paid with her life that night. It was actually far more frightening than the scene that, pivotal climax in the film.
Mm-hmm.
There was really no blood. It was, there was nothing gory about it, but she was levitated into the air, and in a split second, she was thrown, a fraction of a second, thrown from the middle of our dining room 20 feet away into the middle of our parlor. And when she hit the floor in the chair she was sitting in, everyone that was present in that house heard her skull hit the floor, and we all thought she was dead. Wow. It was the most horrific moment of my life. It's in, I believe, the chapter War and Peace.
And you and some of your sisters witnessed that, right? You were, I think you said you were peeking through the door, and your father and mother didn't know that you were seeing these things happen, correct?
No, they didn't. The only one that discovered that we knew was Ed Warren. And when after my father punched him in the face and took him to the floor and busted his nose, and he started going through the kitchen to go to the bathroom, and he ran right into us. Cindy and I were standing in the front foyer, and he just embraced us. He knew what we had seen, and he just automatically embraced us and said, "Please go upstairs." Christine stayed upstairs in the room directly over what was happening. She heard everything. April was in the stairwell of my bedroom that fed down into the parlor, and she was hiding around the corner watching from her vantage point. What we saw that night, no child should ever see happen to a parent. What we saw that night, none of us should have been in the house or even been allowed in the house. And what the medium did was nothing short of spiritual malpractice. She threw open wide the doors to the netherworld in her conjuring, in her calling to the spirits. And she brought something into that house that was not from this world. I don't know if it ever walked on this planet. It was an energy and a force that was absolutely, totally capable of taking my mother's life, and it chose not to. But it did, for a brief period of time, inhabit her body, and her whole torso, her legs, her arms twisted into a knotted ball to the extent that anyone rational would have expected to hear bones snapping. And she started howling and screaming and then speaking in a language that does not exist on this planet. If it ever did, it was ancient. And everyone was horrified. The priest got up from the table and just cowered in the corner near the built-in china cabinet. somebody else got up and hid behind the piano. It was awful. The table lifted up 3 or 4 inches off the floor, and then a force slammed it back down onto the floor with such incredible power that it made 4 indentations in the wood where the spindle legs landed. And then she was levitated, and she was up a good 3 feet in the air when all of a sudden, there are no words, Patrick. There are no words to describe what this actually looked like. It was like she was there and then she was gone. She was there and then she was gone, and we all heard her head strike the floor, and she was knocked unconscious. My father screamed, "Oh my God," he lost it. He tried to run to my mother's side. Ed grabbed him by the arm to stop him, and my father turned around and cold-cocked that man like I've never seen anybody hit another person. It took him right to the floor, and Ed was a big man, way bigger than my dad. Lorraine started yelling for the cinematographers to go back down into the cellar and gather up their equipment. And when they came back up the stairs, these 2 grown men were sobbing uncontrollably, gasping for air, sobbing, having run up the stairs, crying their eyes out because all of their state-of-the-art, extremely expensive camera equipment was in thousands of pieces all over the floor of the cellar, as though the big cameras on the big tripods had been picked up like a feather and smashed into the granite walls of the cellar.
Wow.
They ran out of the house. They ran out the kitchen door. They went and put themselves in the van, and they stayed there. They never came back in the house. The audio woman packed up her gear and got out of the house within, I would say, a minute. It was chaos. It was bedlam. It was negative energy that was just oozing out of every pore of my father's body. He yelled for me to go call for an ambulance. They stopped me. That made him even crazier because he was trying to check my mother for vital signs. It was a horrible, horrible scene. And there's no surprise that it didn't make it into their notes, into their case files, the way that things ended. And that was about 3 years into us being in the house. We lived there another 7 years. They did come one time again, I think the following autumn after this occurred. This happened in August, and I'm pretty sure that they came again around Halloween. And they came during the daytime. They made sure, I'm certain of this, that my father's car was not there. And they came to the door to check and see if my mother was still alive, because they did not know if she had survived it when they left the house that night.
Now, you were saying that the energy the medium brought in, I want to make sure I understand you correctly. Were you saying that none of that was native to the house before, completely separate from other experiences?
Yes.
And
yes,
did that
violent.
Contribute to activity in later years, that event, or was it gone after that?
No, it was gone after that. We think if it wasn't gone, it was laying dormant.
Yeah.
But, I don't want anybody to make any mistake about this. This paranormal investigation, doing this kind of research, living in this kind of an environment, or even visiting this kind of an environment, comes with some inherent risks and dangers. And if people don't know what they're doing, it can deteriorate quickly. And so I think that's why it's almost like a clarion call, a warning to all spiritual warriors to know what you're warring against, because, that kind of negative energy, believe me when I tell you, it had all the force that it would have ever required to have claimed my mother's life. And I really don't believe for a moment that it wanted to kill her. What it wanted to do was make its presence known to the priest and the medium and the Warrens and all the rest of us that were in that house. From that day on in my life, I knew that such a thing as pure, unadulterated evil existed in the world. or could be allowed into the world through some type of portal or vortex or whatever other label anybody wants to put on it. It is real, it is there, and it is something to guard against. And it is because I have stared down at the darkness with my own eyes that I choose deliberately to live in the light. It is my only protection against it.
A few years ago, I interviewed Keith Johnson, who was a member of the paranormal group PIRO, who told us stories of his involvement with the case and that they invited the Warrens into the situation and then how they were told they could no longer be a part of it. And according to his recollection, he said he would have been about 18, he guessed, and you would have been about 15. Can you tell us how that whole thing went regarding PIRO's involvement and then the Warrens?
Well, he told you the truth. There's a weird, I love Keith. I'm going to be with him this weekend up at the Ocean State Paracon.
I saw that.
Yeah. And I'm really excited about being with him and Sandra. And, the thing is that they came pulling into our yard one day. It was in August of 1973. And he was dressed in a kind of a tunic, I would say, like linen tunic.
He said he was looking super hip.
Yeah, he was looking super hip. And my sister Nancy is so hysterical, comes running into the house and she says, "Mom, Jesus Christ is here." It's just so adorable. Just a little pixie. And she was like, "Oh my God, it's God." Oh, she was just so funny. And my mother's like, "Oh, Dan, what are you talking about? Okay, who's here?" Mom goes out and yard, and my father's getting ready to leave. And my mother looks at my father, and she's like, "I don't know who these people are." And he's like, "You handle this. I got to go. I got clients to see." And so he just flew out of there. He didn't really even greet them or anything. He just got in his car and left. And so they came to the door, to the porch door, and I was standing out there with my mother and Cindy and Nancy, and I don't know where Christine was. I think April was running around somewhere. And he introduced himself as Keith Johnson and PIRO, and had his twin brother Carl with him and the rest of the group. And my mother didn't understand why they were there or why they had come. And Keith said, "It's because you called me. We talked," and he recognized her voice. And she said, "No, dear, I never called anybody. I never called anybody about this." And then immediately her mind starts going to, who of my friends that I have told about this would have called a paranormal group to come to the house, and in her mind, she's starting to go through, was it Barbara? Was it Kathy? Was it, this one or that one? Her girlfriends, her confidants. And he's like, "Well, we understand that you have an issue here, and, I'd like to talk to you about it." And she felt warm towards him. I mean, he was a very incredibly warm and charming and disarming person. But she didn't like his brother, and she wouldn't let him in the house. Mm. And so she let Keith in, and she talked with him in the kitchen for a little while. And then he asked if he could look around the house, and Mom gave all of us permission to give him a tour of the house. And meanwhile, his brother kind of snuck in the other door, and my mother was ticked off about that. So, it got a little hairy there for a couple of minutes. But she just, and when come to find out, he was practicing the dark arts at the time, and she picked up on that. And Keith was really much more of Jesus freak. He was, really into his religious faith, and he was very, very much into studying, doing the real homework about this, not dabbling in things that you shouldn't mess with. So they were, dichotomy. They were polar opposites, really, as twin brothers at the time, both of them being so young. And so she was kind of holding Carl at bay, and the group was walking around the outside of the farm and kind of peeking in windows and looking around, and it was a number of people, several people. So Mom was trying to keep up with all of that and what was going on, and Keith was getting a tour of the house, and I was with my mother downstairs, and all of the girls went into Nancy's bedroom over the kitchen, and Keith said, "Do you have any do you hang a crucifix in your room, or do you have any kind of protection here? And, they all looked at each other like, no, because, we didn't. We didn't have pictures of Jesus or, crosses on the wall or anything like that. And he asked if they had any soap or sidewalk chalk. And Nancy had chalk upstairs at her room, and she handed it to him. And it was August. It was hot as hell upstairs, and the windows were open, but they had swollen open, like they wouldn't move. You couldn't close them. And he reached into both of the windows and drew a cross on both of the screens. And as soon as he did, those windows slammed closed. And they had glass in them that was 200 years old. All the rippled glass, the kind that burnt irreplaceable in the original colonial homes of America. That glass should have shattered into 1 billion pieces for how hard those windows slammed closed. And then the door to the closet slammed. And then the door to the stairwell downstairs slammed. And then something slammed Nancy in the side of her head and knocked her right to the floor. Yep. And, his eyes were as big as platters, the poor thing. They finally got the door open and, he was up there with like 5 girls. They were all sitting in a circle on the floor, and all hell broke loose in that room.
Mm-hmm.
And he got the door open finally. The door was fighting him. He finally got the latch to open. And that happens to us a lot, but I don't think he expected it, and it really freaked him out. And they came flying down those stairs. That none of them fell is just a miracle of physics, because all of them should have just tumbled down over each other down that whole stairwell. And he went back into the kitchen and just, told my mother what had happened, and she knew because she heard the noise of, what was going on. And she's like, what happened? And, oh God, he was there. She calmed him down. My mother had to calm him down. It was, it was.
You all were the experienced ones.
Well, yeah. And then before he left, he asked if he could see the cellar, and I took him down into the cellar. And just before we came up, we stood at the bottom of the stairwell and just held hands and prayed together. And I didn't have any fear of going down there with him. It was a place that I avoided normally. And when we did have to go down, we'd go down in groups because there were several incidents where, we had been down there as individuals or just 2 of us, that things happened. It was an incredibly busy area in terms of activity. But I didn't have any qualms about going down there with him. I perceived Keith to be rather holy, and not just in his dress and his demeanor, or that he was holding a Bible. There was something just sincerely and authentically solemn and sacred about the man, and there still is. He's just really a truly remarkable human being, and a very, very kind, loving, generous soul. And I do love him very much. I love him very much.
And so then he suggested, bringing the Warrens in, and then they said... No. Oh.
He didn't suggest it to my mom. Not that he recalls, I don't think, or that my mother recalls. But to this day, we don't know who called him and through my mother's voice, or if my mother was in a state of oppression that was so severe that there was something manipulating her, using her for the moments that it took. But there was a reason that Keith was called in, and he's the one that went to a seminar that Ed and Lorraine were giving at, I believe, the University of Rhode Island down in Kingston, and approached them and told them about our predicament. And they waited before they came. That was probably in September, and they didn't come until the night before Halloween, because they were operating mistakenly under the illusion that the veil would be thinner at Halloween than it would be at any other time of year. And there is no veil. There's no veil. That's a machination. That's something that human beings have literally fabricated so that we can live in a realm that feels safe and secure to us. But there is really, energy is energy. Everything is energy, and dimensions exist simultaneously. It's whether or not you can see into them, or if you're allowed to, or if something on what they call the other side wants to see or be seen. So there is actually some contact and engagement that occurs, even if there isn't any verbalization, even if there isn't any eye contact, even if there isn't anything but a ball of smoke. It's still conscious contact. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's awareness. There's awareness on at least one side that you're seeing something that doesn't normally manifest in this 3D realm. But it doesn't mean it's not there all the time, in the same way that it doesn't mean that on the night of the full moon, when it covers the earth and you see everything and you know it's there, it doesn't mean that it's not there on the night of the new moon. It's still there. It's just invisible. So it's, I think, the same concept, the same hypothesis and theoretical quantum mechanics of what spirit activity is. And I think ultimately, if we ever know exactly what it is and are able to pinpoint, the mechanics of it, those answers are most likely going to come through an amalgamation of spirituality and scientific research, because ultimately everything breaks down to mathematics, and there's some reason why some people are able to see this. And I think that a lot of it has to do with either exposure or overexposure, and also a natural proclivity or sensitivity to spirit activity. But none of us, absolutely none of us, remember ever in our lives having any kind of experience like that until we moved to the farm. So it was isolated and insulated there when we arrived. But we thought that 10 years later, when we left the farm, that we were going to be leaving them behind. And nothing could have been further from the truth. Profound attachments were formed and have persisted lifelong.
Interesting. And what's also interesting is that I've had discussions with many guests on this show, and my own thoughts about it have grown and changed about, whether there's a veil and, what are the myths about a veil.
Well, I really do believe that all of us are completely and utterly surrounded by spirit all the time, that we don't have to go here or go there to conduct paranormal investigation. All we have to do is be in our own space and make contact with our loved ones that have passed, our ancestors, and what other interdimensional beings exist in our realm, in our sphere, as it were. And there's a multitude. So just from my own personal experience, I can say that there's a multitude. And, there is a quantum leap of difference between believing something and knowing something. I know that there is something beyond our mortal existence. And because of that, I've lived a fearless life. I'm not afraid to die. I am afraid of pain. I don't want to suffer pain before I die. I don't know anybody that wants to. But I know that wherever I go, I will go on, because I've seen with my own eyes that is the truth of existence, that death is not anything more than a transformation.
What I've gotten out of my spiritual shift and journey in the last 10 years, I thought it was interesting you said that, is the same thing. The coolest thing that I've gotten out of it is that I'm not afraid of death.
It's very liberating, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
To let go of fear. People
and dogma.
I'm really the antithesis of what people think that I must be in terms of my experiences. But as I said before, it's because I've seen the dark side of existence that I choose to live in the light. I think that we create our experiences too, and when we're not creating them, when we're actually experiencing a sensory perception that's from, beyond our physical selves and our ability to manifest our destiny and our reality, because thoughts are things. Everything begins as a thought before it manifests in form. So, not only are we capable of that, but we're also capable of having experiences foisted upon us from beyond ourselves. And we get to choose how we are going to react to that. And if everybody wants to just live their lives as a fear-based carbon unit, they are certainly free to do that. But I choose not to. I don't feel threatened by spirit. I don't feel put upon in any way. I never had an altercation at the house, not once, not ever. And, other members of my family cannot say that, but I can. And it was almost like I was one of them as much as I was one of my own family. That I just had a simpatico. I had an ability to coexist peacefully with them that other members of my family did not. And I think that it was my sense of familiarity with them that proved most profound the day when I was 2 days away from turning 18. And in the chapter, Welcome Home, I saw a full-body manifestation of an old woman standing right beside me on the hearthstone of the fireplace. And she had every feature. She was a mirror image reflection of me, only as an old woman dressed in clothes from the 1700s with the leg of mutton and the pearls down the sleeves. And she smiled at me with an expression that was so loving that it just brought tears to my eyes, because I got to see what I was going to look like as an old woman. And I found her beautiful, and her hair, she had a massive head of hair just like I do, and it was all wound in a bun on the top of her head. And she just smiled at me, and then she just vaporized. Everybody in my family saw her. I was the only one that saw her face. And I didn't tell anybody in my family for several years after that experience, because in that moment of epiphany for me, I realized that if that was actually true, if it wasn't, poltergeist playing jokes, if it was actually true that she had been the one that was watching over us and the one that was kissing us goodnight and the one that smelled the flowers and fruit, and she was the one that had lived in the house before and was very kind and gentle and loving, and she was me 200 years before I was born.
I forgot all about that.
And that was the moment I started to believe in at least the possibility of reincarnation.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there's another part of me that feels like this is my first and only time on this bizarro land planet, and that I am such a misfit. I have felt that way my whole life, like I don't belong here. What am I doing here? What is this? My whole life. And it wasn't until maybe the last 7 or 8 years that I finally understood why I was here, and I started feeling comfortable in my own skin.
Well, you've been on amazing as your life has been since The Conjuring and since bringing the story out. You've kind of had a brand new whirlwind journey.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when the movie opened, because nobody that worked on the film wanted to go out and be the face of the movie. They didn't want to go out and do interviews, and they didn't. There were a lot of things that happened on that set that I'm not, privy to share. I know you've done your homework. You always do, and I know that you know some of them. But those are their stories to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that enough happened on that set and on the soundstage also, that they just didn't want really any part of the movie after it opened. We had a really good after party, the premiere, the red carpet and the whole 9 yards out in Hollywood, and we had a great after party. And I got to meet some really great people that night. But it was, and that was it. They were all, the girls stayed thick as thieves. They formed their own sisterhood, the 5 of them.
Mm-hmm.
They talked to each other all the time on the phone. I did, the only thing I ever did with any one of the cast was I did a press junket in Miami with Joey King. And all the time that we had any downtime between interviews, she was on the phone with one of the girls. And all she kept saying to them is, I'm with Andrea and you are not. I'm with Andrea and you are not. I mean, she just taunted them. And she'd put them on the phone. Hi, how are you, honey? I love Shanley Caslov, a young lady that played me. I thought she did a remarkably good job. And Mackenzie Foy did a great job. All of them did a fantastic job. And Kyla Deaver, of course, everybody fell in love with beautiful little Kyla Deaver. And she was the epitome. They could not have cast that film better than they did. I know you agree with me.
Mm-hmm.
And Lily Taylor threw herself into, she got robbed not getting an Academy Award nomination. She threw herself into that role.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, movies like that genre, generally do not get recognized
They suffer,
by the Academy. But she deserved some recognition for the incredible job that she did. And I probably spent that night at the party, I probably spent an hour of my time there with her that night and got to hear all about her haunted house and all about everything. It was awesome. She's just an incredible person.
She's a real character. I know that much without meeting her.
Yep. Well, I loved her in 6 Feet Under. I was thrilled when they cast her as my mother. Everybody did a remarkable job. Everybody did. But I'll tell you, it was a real experience going around for about 2 or 3 months. I was the face of The Conjuring, and Warner Brothers flew me everywhere. I mean, I was all over the place. I had 2 bags packed at all times because sometimes I didn't get more than 24 hours notice when they were going to fly me to New York or fly me to L.A. or, fly me here and fly me there. And it was wild. And I was doing radio interviews that they were arranging and taking care of all of the details. And then that was it. And the movie and they cut me loose and I was back to my normal life and writing again and getting ready to publish the 3rd book in the trilogy. And, it was a wild experience. It really was. I don't know how I got through it.
Yeah, I've followed you. You were like a crazy person during all of that time because you were so busy. And I remember we'd connected on Facebook, and I messaged you for an interview during all that time, which is crazy. And I remember you were like, "Oh, honey, just I am so sorry. This cannot happen right now at the moment. You'll have to get back with me."
I know. I was nice though, right? Was
yes,
I really
you
nice
were.
About it? Okay, good.
Yes, you were. I've always loved you.
Oh, bless your heart. You're so sweet. No, and I meant it too. I mean, I was so slammed. You would laugh. You would howl if you saw my calendars. I use paper calendars, like big ones with squares, and I write everything in each day. And I mean, there were months where every single square inch of every square was filled for 7 days a week, month in and month out. It was wild.
Mm-hmm.
I probably did 1,000 interviews. I probably spoke to millions and millions of people on AM radio and FM radio and, like WABC and CBS and NBC. And, I was all over the place. And like I said earlier, when I prefaced our conversation tonight, I have to give credit where credit is due, because had I not gotten that kind of exposure, my books wouldn't have gotten that kind of exposure. And they were very generous in terms of, where they put me up in the finest locations and, the most beautiful 5-star resorts. And I mean, spared no expense to make sure that I was comfortable and then worked me to death. So that if I spent maybe 3 or 4 hours in the really comfy bed, I was grateful, but it was an experience. It was once in a lifetime experience. Actually, it probably isn't, because of course we're going to have 3 more films come out that are the mirror image reflection of the trilogy and will tell the authentic, whole, true story. And, I'm working on the screenplays for that right now. I've got a fabulous team of producers and a director and all my ducks in a row. I've got everybody in place to put this all together, and all of them, bless their hearts, are waiting on me to finish my end of the deal. And then we go forward with this whole project. We're going to shoot all the movies back to back. so that we cover, we're going to shoot over a year, so that, and with 3 sets of kids, because we grew up on the farm. I came at 12 and I left at 21. I was an entirely different, so each film's going to have a separate group of kids and the same principal actors. My mother and father and Mr. and Mrs. Warren will be in the second film. It'll be a real true rendition of what happened, because I told the production team when I met with them last November out in California that there's no point in making another hollyweirded up fictionalized film at all. And so that was the agreement, is that I got to call the shots. And that doesn't mean that I'm a control freak. I'm perfectly malleable and amenable to, doing what works with the script as long as it follows the timeline and it tells the story accurately. That's what I care about. So that when people leave the theater, they know through just comparative analysis that The Conjuring was a really good stab at it, but this is what actually happened. And I'm bringing in one of the very best illusionists in the world, who's a good personal friend of mine, Aidan Sinclair. He's just excellent. And he's, we've talked at length about how to recreate what we actually saw, not what Hollywood thinks we saw.
Mm-hmm.
That's important. It's important to me. Because you know what? I give the viewing audience credit for intelligence. I don't think people are going to be passing out. I don't think people are going to be running out of the theater. I think that the people that said that with the original script for The Conjuring were just fear-based. And because it scared them, they thought that the world wasn't ready for it. Well, I think the world is ready for this. And we're not going to do anything that, out on a limb and that's going to terrify people. That's not my intention, and that's not how it was. And maybe some people will react to it that way, but that's not my intention, and that's not how I'm writing the script.
Well, and truth matters, and truth is important, above everything else, whether it's frightening to someone or not.
Yeah. I mean, more so than anything, I think they're going to find it absolutely fascinating as they see the journey that we take as a family, from literally transforming to people who could not only see these entities and at times interact with these entities, but that came to acknowledge them and make peace with them. It's a whole different take on what paranormal, I even hate that word. To me, and I think I mentioned this to you in one of our private conversations, that paranormal and supernatural are labels. I think that if something exists, it's natural and it's normal. And so to me, the spirits are absolutely perfectly normal. And I have spiritual encounters virtually on a day-to-day basis. So it's not anything unusual or abnormal to me. And there are many people like me. I'm not the only one. So, we can get into a whole discussion about how that comes about, or, if it's natural, or if there are just some of us on the planet that are able to relate and interact in that way and others cannot. I don't know all the answers, and there are no experts in the field. And if our family doesn't know exactly what we saw, there's nobody else that's walking this earth that does. And if they say so, they're living in bad faith, and they're lying to themselves, because that's fraudulent to make as a claim. We don't know what this is, and maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe that's part of the mystery of life. Maybe that is what keeps our curiosity piqued and keeps our intellectual evolution in gear, is wondering about our own consciousness, wondering about our place in the universe, wondering what else there is, and wondering about the unknown. But to me, it's not so unknown. And to others like me, it's not so unknown. I don't ever perceive it as a curse. I perceive it as a blessing. And, I wrote about this in one of the quotations that's been clipped and used many times in many different venues, is one I wrote several years ago. To be touched by spirit is not a curse but a blessing. It is a rare and precious glimpse into the realm from which we come and will inevitably return. Be not afraid. And the work that I do in the world might, be a downer to some who just want to have the bejeebies scared out of them. But my message is one of peace and love and hope and reconciliation and acknowledgement and acceptance and dispelling fear. And the only way to dispel fear is to embrace it and to thank it for every time it ever saved you from making a bad decision, ever saved you from yourself, ever intervened on your behalf. But when you turn your life path over to it, when you relinquish your own personal power to fear and you let it live you, then you only live a half life. And so I can say that from the moment at the age of 12 that I saw my first full body apparition that was so clear to me that he appeared absolutely solid and human and breathing, to the extent that I greeted him as I passed him going into the kitchen on the day we moved into the farm. After I processed that and I realized that what I saw wasn't alive, the way that I processed that was, there is something else. It is real. Life does go on. And it brought me comfort and solace to know that all of the loving and the giving and the sharing that we humans do with our families and our friends and our fellow human being, all that we put out into the world in terms of our art and our music and our creative energies, however they manifest, all that we put into the world to make it a better place is not lost when the vessel says enough.
So the farmhouse is now owned by a woman named Norma Sutcliffe, and I only say her name because she's reached out to me and I've blogged and mentioned that before. And from around the time the 2013 film came out, you shared a video of you visiting Norma in your old home for the first time in a long time. And Norma is very friendly in this video and discusses a bit of activity that she says happened to her since they've lived there. And you made your fans and followers later aware of some really unfortunate attention and invasions that were happening at the farmhouse due to the attention of the film, even before the film was actually released, just from the trailer. And you pleaded for people to stop and to, give the family, Norma and her husband, their space. And so I blogged about that current situation. I was in deep into this whole story. And so I was blogging along with you, and I shared that video and your message with people. And soon after, Norma, or at least someone, I can't claim to know for sure that was Norma, but someone named Norma Sutcliffe visited my site and made the following comment. And so Norma says, "People are still coming. I have a YouTube video disproving claims and speaking about the devastation we face because of the movie. The Conjuring, the Perron story, the current owner speaks out. Also found on History versus Hollywood. Several months of research with a journalist to find her mother created the myths about murder, suicide, etc. Listening to many interviews found other false statements. Our discovery of facts may help in questioning the entire story. I have more information." And that was her comment. And then the video she mentioned is over an hour long. And at the time, I watched every second of it. And Norma included a ton of information based on her own research and made a lot of claims. And, to be fair, I decided to once again blog about her comment and include her video and her side of the story. And clearly they were being terrorized and this was in fact affecting them. But her story seemed to be changing from, she had a previous appearance when the ghost hunters came and visited with them years before, and in the video where she visited with you. And so it's at this point that I began to be confused about what was legend, what was real, what was not. And I think the Bathsheba character had a lot to do with my confusion and probably a lot of people's confusion if they were following this deeply. And so I really did kind of get lost in it all. So what facts do we know? And I guess you can, make a comment on any of what I just read, but I would like to know, what facts do we know about Bathsheba Sherman, and is she often confused with a Mrs. Arnold?
Well, yes, and that was because of what Lorraine Warren walked into our house blind, knowing nothing of the history of the house, knowing nothing of the history of the area. She came from Monroe, Connecticut, hours away from where we were. And she walked into the house, and she put her hand down on the corner of the black stove in the kitchen. And she covered her eyes, and she said, "There's a malignant force in this house. There's a malicious presence in this house. Her name is Bathsheba." And we thought that was odd because she couldn't have known about
And you
Bathsheba.
knew about her name already before then?
Yes, we did. We did not know all the truth about her at the time because we did not know all the truth or the history about her. The records from the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s were spotty at best, and they were spread out all over the place. And even though my mother had been doing some historical research on the area and on the house in particular, her name kept coming up. And Mr. McEachern, who was a very elderly man and described himself as the town historian to my mother, lived about a couple of miles away on his own farm. He's the one that told my mother about Bathsheba Sherman. Mm-hmm. And he told her that he thought she was related to the Arnolds, but who owned our farm. But she never actually lived at the Arnold estate, and I made that clear in the books. Also, there were accusations that were levied against her as a young woman, having a baby dying while she was in that house, that a baby in her care in that house died. And there was an autopsy and an inquest because they found a needle impaled at the base of its skull. I don't know if it was male or female. I don't know how old it was. There was an inquest in Chepachet, which was the town seat because Burrillville was not even incorporated as a town yet. And basically, the judge said, there's no evidence here that this young woman did anything wrong or tried to hurt this baby in any way. Of course, it was at a time where there were sewing baskets laying around all over the place, and, it could have just been a terrible, tragic accident. And as I wrote the 3 books, I always tried to, not only tell her story, but also to give her the benefit of the doubt because she's not here to defend herself. But, also to say, this is how, this woman was not only punished throughout her life in the court of public opinion, she was, according to Mr. McEachern, she was persona non grata in town. She was treated abominably by the people of the town because she was tried and convicted in the court of public opinion. And this is the story that he told my mother, and my mother eventually told Lorraine Warren what Mr. McEachern had told her. Subsequently, we found out that she was not an Arnold, that she was actually the offspring of a union between 2 of the oldest families in New England, that, original colonists that followed Roger Williams to what he founded as the colony of Rhode Island sometime after 1636, the Thayer and the Taft family, 2 very influential and affluent families, and that she married a man named Johnson Sherman and lived on the Sherman farm, which was about a mile away from the Arnold farm. And we don't know any of the details. I've made it very clear in the books, that this is just spotty and a smattering of details, and that we don't know for certain who these multitude of spirits were that we saw in the house.
Especially in your 3rd book, I think you did a great job at that. And I think most of this that I talked about that went down in the comment by Norma, I think this was before your third book came out, and I hadn't read that stuff yet.
Well, I'm not going to trash Norma right now, even though I am angry at her, and I feel that, this abrupt 180 that she did shattered a 28-year-long friendship that I had with her. I will tell you the truth, the same way that I've told everybody else the truth. The way that I met Norma Sutcliffe is she walked in the front door of my restaurant in the late 80s, and she recognized my business partner, Gail, as a friend of her brother's or somebody that she knew from childhood. And they had both grown up in the town of Lincoln, Rhode Island, and she said, Gail, is that you? And Gail looked at her and she said, Norma, is that you? I'm standing in the kitchen of my restaurant peeling potatoes by hand. And I'm looking out the little window and looking at this woman for the first time. And as I peeked through the window into the main part of the restaurant, she walked up to Gail and she said, I don't think I've seen you in, 30 or 40 years. And, they started chatting, and she said, oh, I'm so excited. I just bought a original colonial home up on Round Top Road in Harrisville, and I dropped what I was doing. I knew it was my house. I knew it was. And as I'm walking out the kitchen, and she says verbatim, and the best part is it's haunted. I was like, you could have knocked me over with a feather. Wow. And I immediately went up to her and I introduced myself as Andrea Perron. She said, the Andrea Perron, one of the parents that lived in my house. And that was it. I dropped everything. I turned all my work over to my employees. I dumped my partner. I dumped everyone. And I went and I sat and talked to Norma for more than 2 hours. And we formed a fast friendship. And for the next 2 years, she chased my mother around. My mother was one of our business partners, and she spoke with Norma at length that day, too. And for the next 2 or 3 years, she dogged my mother to try to get her to write a book with her called Harrisville House, Past and Present, so that she could denote all of the things that had happened to her and her husband in just the short time that they had been in the house. And this went on, and my mother finally said, Norma, I don't want this story told. I want my family to live in peace. This is not something that I'm going to be involved with. Please stop asking me. And then over the years, I went there. I was free to go there whenever I wanted to. I loved it. Every chance I had to go visit, I would. I only lived about 10 miles away. So between my work and my work in the theater up in Harrisville, I was in Harrisville all the time, because I was a member of the Theater Company of Rhode Island that worked out of the Assembly Theater in downtown Harrisville, and I was with the company for more than 20 years. But I worked in the next town beneath it in Gloucester, and I lived in a village called Harmony, which was just south of Chepachet. That's that whole northwest corner of Rhode Island, tucked out in the boondocks. But it brought me great comfort to drive past it and stop and walk down to the river and be on land that I always perceived to be my one true perfect home, the only place I've ever felt at home in my life. And I was welcome there. And I will tell you that Jerry, her husband, I'm being very kind tonight because he just passed away not long ago. And I know she's suffering, and I'm very sorry. He was one of the kindest, most gentle, most beautiful human beings with the deepest soul and the most beautiful eyes I have ever seen, an absolute treasure of a human being. And I loved Jerry very much. And when Norma turned on me like a viper after the movie trailer opened, and, it suddenly became all my fault. She went on national news programs and called my mother a liar. Our haunting and what happened in that house is one of the most well documented in history. Mm-hmm. There are people that wrote about that house before we ever moved into it. There are people that wrote about our story that we didn't even know about while we were living there and subsequently after we left, because word got out about what was happening at the house, and so many people in town had experienced things at the house prior to us living there, and then once we were there, that it in a relatively small pocket of southern New England, it was a very well-known story. And Norma bought the house specifically because of its reputation and admitted so. And then when the film came out, she went on national TV all over the country saying that my mother was a liar, that we made it all up, that basically she was just, fooling around when she invited the ghost hunters to come and film an episode there, and countless other paranormal teams to, out of their own pocket on their own dime, travel there and do investigations and present her with evidence that she was now completely denying.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anybody that has any question in their mind, please just go to Ghost Hunter Season 2, Episode 7 and watch it for yourself. She could not be more disingenuous. She's angry. She's angry because James Wan reneged on a deal for them to film The Conjuring at the farm. She would have received a boatload of money for that. And he was so terrified once he read my books that he wouldn't go anywhere near it. And he wouldn't even go into the state of Rhode Island. I mean, he was really, and he admitted it, he was terrified. That's not exactly how he said it, but I can't say on your air what he actually said. So what she thought was going to be something of value to her turned out not to be. And all she got was the bad end of the deal. All she got was the freaking lunatic fringe that came out of the woodwork when the movie opened.
Mm-hmm.
And she went on TV and on radio and said that she didn't even know there was going to be a film made. I have 6 hours of B-roll, which at my discretion I could release at any time, and hours more that Keith and Sandra Johnson took and Ken DaCosta and Rise Up Paranormal took, discussing with her for hours and hours the events that have happened in that house over the 30 years that she's owned it. She's angry, and she's trying to take all of it out on me and my family, and she's trying to disprove everything that I wrote in the books after she bought I don't know how many of the books from me to give to family and friends before the movie opened, talked openly with many people, including me on film, about how excited she was for the movie to open. When it did, she insisted that I take down the video that I have of my interview with her at the farmhouse,
Mm-hmm.
and I accommodated her foolishly and took it down until about 3 weeks later, she put up the vitriolic diatribe, the spewing of venom in her little video that she put out that is inarticulate at best and convoluted at worst. And she can manufacture whatever history she wants. I didn't write this trilogy to be a history book. I wrote this trilogy to be a memoir. I wrote this trilogy so that our recollections of everything that happened to us at the farm were documented and chronicled in the most authentic way that I could. I tethered myself to a keyboard for 7 years of the prime of my life to do it. And if she or anyone else thinks that I sacrificed all of that time for a possible $1 or $2, and that I spent all of that time of my life concocting one big, fat, elaborate lie and then cross-referencing it with every member of my family and making them memorize what I'm telling them their memories are, then she's delusional, and anyone else that thinks that is as well.
Wow.
And that's what I have to say about that.
And I wish that I would have somehow been able to clarify that with you years ago. Thank you for that honesty.
Told you.
Wow.
I don't pull my punches. That's exactly how it went. And she fractured and destroyed our beautiful friendship, what I perceived to be a beautiful friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that I get to be with Jerry in the afterlife, and that I get to have a conversation with him, because I never did anything to hurt them. She's the one that put me in touch with the original producer that made The Conjuring, called me to get my permission to give him my phone number, and then denied all of it.
Wow.
She's the one that did the 180. I have been consistently absolutely straightforward about our story to the few people that were told it prior to when I wrote the books for 40 years. My story hasn't changed. Hers changed every 5 minutes after that movie opened, and I am very sorry that she was inundated with prowlers and inundated with creepy crawling kids. And I'm very sorry that somebody took a crowbar to Bathsheba Sherman's gravestone and desecrated her gravesite. I mean, that's just lunatic stuff. But I didn't do it. I did everything that I could to protect her. And
You very much fought against those things.
I did.
Yeah.
And I contacted Warner Brothers, and I tried to get her security at the farm. And when they contacted her, she was so ugly with them that they said, you know what, basically, kiss off, lady. We didn't film there. We don't owe you anything. None of my readers imposed themselves upon her before that movie opened. It wasn't until people did a little back history and some just incorrigible person went and found her actual street address and posted it on the internet. And I copped the blame for that as well. I never did anything to hurt her. All I ever tried to do was help her. And she has tried in every conceivable way, shape, and form to make my life a living hell. And I just have to let it go. I could sue the living daylights out of her. You know what? Life's too short, and I'm not going to do it. I'm just not. I've got so much ammunition against her, so many things that she has said in public and on the record that I can clearly dispute, and her story has changed so many times. I didn't do anything to deceive anybody. Oh my God, 2 years ago, she bombarded herself into the theater at the Ocean State Paracon while I was giving my lecture. And we were there trying to raise money for a good cause for the Wounded Warrior Project, and she decided to come in and cause a scene. I mean, a huge scene. I can't believe nobody in that theater. There had to be 300 people in that theater, and nobody even had the presence of mind to pick up a smartphone and start filming it because they were so shocked by her behavior. She was physically removed from the theater. She's out of control and she's unhinged, and I'm very sorry about that, but I didn't do it to her. And I did everything I could to protect her, and all she did was vilify me and my family. And you know what? I can stick up for myself, but when you attack my 78-year-old mother, when you attack my mother who's already been to hell and back on this earth, it's war.
And I can tell you my blog is proof of the fact that you fought for her and, tried to protect, cared for their safety and kind of got the word out that all those things were happening at the farmhouse. So I think the world saw that.
I hope so. I mean, there are some people that turned on me. Nothing to be done about it. I'm not responsible for what other people think or what they read or what they buy into. All I can tell you is that if you're getting it directly from the source, which is me or any member of my family, it's the truth. And many, many people know it, including Tom D'Agostino, that in 1983 published his first book, Haunted New England, and wrote at length about what he had heard about what had happened at that house. Our family, unbeknownst to us until I actually bought the book, the great, great Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who created the Encyclopedia of Ghosts and Spirits, has a whole section about Keith Johnson and Carl Johnson and their investigation of our home. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I was doing research, making sure I was using the proper, vernacular for what I was trying to express, that I came across it in that volume. I mean, this has been documented 8 ways from Sunday, and I'm sure there's other places where it's been written about, just as, we heard this happened at this place with this family, that we don't even know about. And that's fine. I don't care. At least I know that what really happened is on the record now. It's in the trilogy and it's out there. And so I don't care whatever else is being written about us. There's only one mistake in the trilogy in terms of what we were told, and I'm going to fix it. And it is in the first volume when Mr. McEachern was explaining to my mother who Bathsheba Sherman was. And so it's written in the volume that she was related to the Arnolds, which I clarified later.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't get to volume 3, you don't know that. And my neglect was to put that Mr. McEachern said she was one of the Arnolds or related somehow to the Arnolds. And that's why she was at the farm and the whole thing with the baby and all of that. My mother found records for all of this stuff and went as far as Worcester, Massachusetts to get it. And she compiled all of the death records and the birth records. There's a whole compilation of records in the Black Book of Burrowville that was published in I think, the 80s that lists all the bizarre deaths that happened in, and not even all of them, but most of the bizarre deaths that happened in a very haunted, very dark little corner of Rhode Island. And, you know, at the time, our farm was part of the Dexter Richardson farm, and the land was all in Rhode Island, and then there was a border skirmish, and Massachusetts took 60 acres of the land from the farm. So when we bought it, 60 acres of our 200 acres was in Massachusetts because of a border skirmish that happened. But the Dexter Richardson family are the family that actually built that farm. And, you know, she disputed the death of Prudence Arnold. She disputed the death of Harmony Arnold. Well, my mother found all of these records, and she put them all in a notebook that Mrs. Warren begged her to take and to make copies of. And my mother reluctantly turned that notebook over to her, including all of her recollections and all of her sketches and drawings of everything that she had seen in the house. And she turned it over to Mrs. Warren, and she never got it back.
That still perplexes me. I can't... Why did she never get it back? That blows my mind.
Well, I think Mrs. Warren thought it was probably a haunted object and nothing that any of her children were supposed to ever look at. But my mother considered it a keepsake of her time there and of all the countless hours of work and research that she did on the farm, because once she realized that the house was haunted, her next logical conclusion was that they weren't just passing through, that they were somehow attached to the property. And she wanted to try to be able to identify who they were.
Mm.
But, you know, as I said in volume 2, it doesn't even matter who they were. That they still are is what matters.
Mm-hmm.
That they still exist in some way, shape, or form and retain characteristics, visually and otherwise, of their original characters and personalities, which is why I say in all of my lectures, how you comport yourself in this life does matter, because you're just going on from here. So you might as well do the best that you can while you're on planet Earth to be the very best person that you can be, because if you don't, you're going to have to learn your lessons all over again someplace else.
The things you can learn in a podcast. I'm just speechless. Wow. Well, I do want to reset and ask a question, probably just, one more question this evening, because it's something that tugged at my heart a little bit, and it involves your sister April. And again, I'm so sorry to say that you lost your sister just months ago, April, and she played a big part in your story, your family's story. And I want to share a portion of one of my blog posts because, again, like I said, it's something that really touched me. So this is my writing in the blog. April spent a lot of time alone, or at least that's what the rest of the family thought. Very early on, after moving to the farmhouse, April met the spirit of a little boy, a boy who gradually got comfortable with her presence and friendship, though he was constantly in fear and hiding. They appeared to be about the same age. They would play together, sharing April's toys while they were alone in her room. When they were done playing, he would disappear in a closet to hide. She was never once afraid. She grew to like spending time with him, even though he never spoke. As April grew up to be a teenager, she mentions that often the little boy would peek out of the closet into her room in hopes that she'd decide to play for a while. Not being the same little girl she once was, she ignored him. When she described the disappointed look on his face as he disappeared into the closet once more, that's when I felt the tug in my heart, and my tear ducts proved to be fully functioning. these experiences and the guilt of leaving the little boy at the farm has affected April her whole life. That just, what was it like getting, if I'm not mistaken, April was one of the last to really kind of open up about her experiences at the farmhouse. Is that true?
Yes, she kept them hidden, especially after she didn't want to share him with anybody else. She didn't want to introduce him to anybody else. He was hers. They had a very strange, almost like little brother, little sister. They were basically the same age. She figured he was about 5 or 6 when he died. And so when she met him, they were the same age. And then he was stuck and she grew up. I will tell you something that I have not written in the books and I have not shared with anyone else. But about 3 years ago, before I moved to Florida, I was still up in Georgia with my mother and my sister where I wrote the books at my sister's little farm. April came to visit. And one night, very late, we were sitting up, and we always had a tendency to just kind of cuddle on the same couch, just make sure that our feet were touching or some part of us was touching each other. We'd sit close and just, she was my baby. And, I was 7 years old when she was born. I was at just the right age to claim her as my own. Mm-hmm. And I was always very, very protective of her, as I was with all my sisters, but especially April being my baby. And she was sitting there and she said, just out of the blue, I don't even remember what we were discussing before because it hit me like electroshock therapy. She said, Oliver came to visit me. I said, what? After all these years of zero contact with him? And she said, yes, I was coming out of sleep the other morning, and he was standing right there beside the bed, just smiling at me, just looking at me sleep, watching me sleep. And he just faded away as I opened my eyes. She said he was so beautiful. She just wanted to wrap her arms around him, and it was too late. He was gone. And I will never get over my sister's death. I will never recover from this. I am reconciled to that. None of us will. We will all go on. Although I have to tell you, honestly, I wake up every morning and open my eyes and have that momentary reaction of shock that I survived another night without my sister being in the world with me anymore. I'll never get over this. Mm-hmm. And I hope she's with Oliver.
Gosh, I hope so too. I'm. It's breaking my heart now. It's one of the stories that moved me more than anything from the trilogy, and I think it also, when I blogged about it, I think it also touched a lot of people. Just the concept of thinking about children and their spirit friends and the attachments that they can, maybe attachment is the wrong word to use, but the relationship and friendship that some children build. And, gosh, it's getting to me, but I'm so glad that you included that in the book. And I mean, how beautiful for her to open up to you that she saw him again. Just how long was the absence that she hadn't had any communication with him before
the last time she saw him, the last time when she was 15, not long before we moved out of the farm.
Wow.
And she was 48 the next time she saw him.
Wow. Was that closure to her, you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, she was very happy about it. And she just glowed when she told me, because one of the heavy burdens that she carried lifelong was leaving him behind and not paying attention to him as she grew up and left him behind emotionally in that house, because she had, great feelings for him, and she knew that he was frightened of something or someone because of the way he would quickly dash a look over his shoulder before he would come out of the the little door to the eaves in the center chimney upstairs. We called it the chimney closet. It was a room that once housed the original center chimney that had been removed because it was unsafe, and a smaller chimney was put in to vent the heating system that was installed in the cellar in the 1920s. So, it was a long time. And when she told me about, I'll never forget the expression on her face. It was so peaceful. It was closure for her, but I don't think that there is closure. I don't know what our relationships were, why we felt the way that we did. It fractured our family. Patrick, we never lived under the same roof again as a family when we left the farm, because to my dismay, in my senior year of college, my mother approached my father and told him that she would not survive another winter in the house and that we had to move, we had to leave. And they put the house on the market, and they didn't tell me. And it languished there for 6 months, and nobody even called to come look at it. And it was fairly priced. It was under market price. It was, a beautiful original colonial home in America. I mean, there were 1,000 reasons to leap all over it. And the spirits wouldn't let us go. And my father went to the abutting landowner in Massachusetts and cut him the sweetest deal of the millennium. And he ended up buying it. And my mother called me, and I was, in my finals, in my senior year, and called me and told me that the farm was sold. I thought I would die. I could not believe it. I couldn't believe it. I expected to live there my whole life. I expected that would be my one and only home. I was completely at ease in the house. I didn't have any issue with the spirits, and things had calmed down so much after the séance, and all of that had happened, and my mother had her epiphany in understanding that we were living in shared space in multiple dimensions simultaneously. When it made sense to her, she started coming back to us. And, we could talk for hours about this. I mean, we really could talk for hours about this, but suffice to say that my mother felt that she needed to be out of that house for myriad reasons. She didn't trust the lull in activity because we had been lulled into a false sense of security in the past. She just wanted to be out of there. And so I had to weigh the home of my dreams and my family's nightmares against my mother's health and well-being. And of course, there was no question that I had to go with her. And I told her, I'll never leave you. I'll always be with you. We'll always be together. Well, that didn't turn out to be the case. There were many years that I didn't live with her, but all the years that I wrote these books, I did. I uprooted my whole life. I left a job that I loved, a very lucrative position at a private school. I was a counselor. I did, worked with behaviorally challenged young boys. And it was a very fulfilling job. I loved it very much. I left my theater company behind after 20 years of devoting myself to the stage and to this company. And I left everything behind so that I could move to Georgia with my cat and my dog and write our story. And I knew it was time to do it. I knew it was like a bell went off in my head. And I devoted myself to the cause to the exclusion of all else in my life for those 7 years, except the care and tender, loving care of my mother. And, I don't have any regrets about that. I don't. But what happened to us altered all of us in profound ways. It opened us in ways that are difficult to comprehend. And I cannot honestly say to you that if I hadn't experienced it myself, that I would believe it.
Well, I do have to tell you that, first of all, again, I'm so sorry for your loss. And so my love goes to you And I hope you please send my love to the family.
I will.
And you've basically given us a gift today of your energy and, you know, the spirit you shared with us today and the truth. So I want to thank you for that. You've given me you've had very kind words, you know, for myself too. And I want to thank you for that. But I want to give you...
I only say what I mean, honey.
Oh, you rock so much.
I don't just butter people up for the sake of doing so. You deserve the recognition that I shower upon you because you really did your homework and you looked at this from every conceivable angle and you came directly to the source for commentary. And, you know, I mean, I responded to a number of your blogs. You know, I saw you when you read back to me what Norma had written. I had read that.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that was there. You know, I have a great deal of respect for you and for the way that you delve into your material and you cover all of it to the extent that you are able in your research. It is thorough, it is precise, it is meticulous, and you don't know how much I appreciate that because I've probably done 500 interviews where I had to just run the interview because the first question was, so, did everything that happened in The Conjuring actually happen to your family? Let me put a bullet in my brain now. Oh, tell us about the Annabelle doll. I don't know. I never met her. She had absolutely nothing to do with our story, and that is exactly how cynical Hollywood is because they decided to weave that story into our story to set up the next movie, which was Annabelle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the truth.
Yeah, and don't even get me started on Conjuring 2.
Oh, please. No, we're not going there.
Yeah.
We're not. No, we're not. No, they did their best with the material that they had.
And they're wonderful movies. Oh, my gosh, they're wonderful movies.
Yeah, but, you know, I mean, to me, the story as it is, and you can attest to it, you have told me personally, I think that the true story is so much more phenomenal than anything else out there. It really is a true spiritual journey of human enlightenment and expansion of human consciousness. And nobody who reads that volume, that trilogy, leaves unaltered.
Mm-hmm. Well, you totally rock, and it's been an honor, but if there's anything else you want to tell us about your exciting new things coming up in your journey, and then, you know, you've still got your website, right? And how do people find you? And, you know, any self-promotion that we love here that you'd like to share before we leave?
Well, I appreciate that. I am very, very easy to find out in Cyberland. I find cyberspace to be extremely comfy and, you know, easy to move around in. But, you know, I prefer for people to just find me on Facebook because that's where I get to interact most with my readers and my followers. My personal page, House of Darkness, House of Light. I did a radio show for 2.5 years with my co-author on In a Flicker, George Lopez. I would love to do a show with you about In a Flicker. I told you about it the other day. It really is a remarkable story. I can't wait for you to read it. After you read it, we'll
Absolutely, please.
Let's see. A World Awakening, House of Darkness, House of Light. Oh, my official fan page that I kind of opened in the reverse because I am a fan of my fans. And I wanted to have a place for my tribe to gather. And it's very uplifting and it's very positive and lots of light and love and, you know, all that hoo-ha. It's just great. It's the tribe. And, you know, if somebody wants to be in the tribe, all they have to do is go to the Buttercup Brigade on Facebook and just knock on the door and we'll let you in.
I just saw that today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a rockin' place. You would love it. And, you know, it's mostly women, but there are some honorary men there that are allowed. And you are absolutely welcome. You'll love Daryl. He's great. You'll love Larry. He's great. You know, I have some men there, you know, but mostly they kind of let us do our sister thing. But we always set a place at the table for the guys, always. And, you know, that's the best place to find me because I'm I love my website, except that it's so old news now. So much has happened. And because I'm working on screenplays, and because I wrote another book, and because I've got 1,000 different appearances to make,
hard to keep up,
and 1,000 interviews to do, I have not put the time and the energy into revamping my website. But that is coming, and I'm actually going to be pulling down House of Darkness, houseoflight.com, and everything that's going on with me, all the books, all the ET stuff, all the lectures, all the everything is going to soon be on AndreaPerron.com, which is sitting, waiting in the wings for me to activate it and build it. And I've got a great webmaster, and we'll do that. But we're not going to probably do that for about 6 months. So if anybody wants to go, just look at what I've got on my original website. It is there, but it needs a really good house cleaning and an update. So please don't be disappointed and write to me. Oh, my God, Mr. Rogers called and wants his website back. I don't want to hear that, okay? I have enough on my plate. Get off my back.
Mr. Rogers. Well, I'm so excited for you and everything that's gonna happen. That's, I'll be following.
Great. That's great. Well, you're one of a handful of people that has my personal cell phone number. Don't ever hesitate to use it, and I will come back on your show whenever you want me to. This has been absolutely delightful, and you are a very special human being, Patrick. I truly appreciate having you in my life.
Oh, thank you. Hey there, it's Patrick. I'm popping in just to say I don't think that we ever mentioned the actual name of Andrea's trilogy. So look for House of Darkness, House of Light. And there's Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3. So I'll have those links in the show notes. Check it out. For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. Just click on the Big Seance Podcast logo or find it in the menu. You can also find and subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn Radio, and iHeartRadio. Do you have any comments or feedback? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how to get your voice in a future show. Or you can call my feedback line, 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. Interested in learning how to promote and share the podcast? Go to bigseance.com/share. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.
No. Oh, hold on a minute. A frog got in the house. Oh, you little, and it's a baby, and I can't just let him die.
Do you know that we've gotten a few frogs in the house because we have so many of them outside right now?
Oh, it's awful. He's tiny. He's less than the size of a dime. And I don't know where he went.
The frogs in our house have become like the new mosquito. It's
Oh, really?
it's
well,
I don't know what it is
raining
about this year.
Here. Yeah, well, my father will find him. He'll survive to the morning. My father will find him and save him. We save everything.
If you made it to the end of this episode, this very long episode, this jam-packed, fabulous episode with Andrea Perron, you totally rock. Seriously. And thank you. So here's your Paranerd hashtag. Jump on Twitter, or you may simply be able to just tweet the episode through whatever podcast app you're using. That's what I usually do. But tweet me
My handle is at Big Seance, and include Andrea Perron, and her handle is at Bathsheba 1680. So that's BATHSHEBA, just like Bathsheba from The Conjuring, and then 1680 at Bathsheba 1680. And the hashtag is real simple. True Conjuring. All one word. Hashtag True Conjuring. Thank you, and peace out.